what a fascinating country, fascinating culture and history, and what an inspiring story of hope. I think I've seen a type of Africa that so many of us have dreamt of for so long that is actually happening. I have a very deep interest in the arts. I used to be an actor before. I've also directed a number of plays as well. By the end of this century, almost half of the entire world is going to be African. 40% of the entire world's population is going to be right here on this continent. So I think, we think at the African Leadership Group that we have a moral imperative to prepare ourselves for that future and to prepare this youth that is going to have to be the leaders to take us into that new Africa.
Hello, Africa. You're listening to 1000 African Voices. I'm your host, Aburengwi C, coming to you from our Johannesburg studios. 1000 African Voices is a program that profiles Africans of diverse cultures who have traveled and lived across the African continent and the world. In this series, we will collect and share stories from all parts of Africa. Welcome.
1000 African Voices.
Hello, African. Welcome to yet another episode of 1000 African Voices. Today we're joined by Veda Sunassee, I hope I'm saying that the right way, who is on the 2019 list of the 100 most influential young Africans. Hello, Veda.
Hi, and you got my name right.
Oh, okay. It's always a relief, when you speak to people from our 54 states, you're never really sure how to pronounce certain surnames, especially. Veda, welcome to 1000 African Voices. Can you just introduce yourself to our listeners? Who is Veda Sunassee?
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. Who's Veda? Just a young African, born and raised in Mauritius, studied in the US, lived in South Africa for 5 years, and back to Mauritius, then to Rwanda. I love traveling across the continent. I've traveled a lot through my work with the African Leadership Group. It's an education company that has set up a bunch of initiatives across the continent. In South Africa, I worked for the African Leadership Academy, which is a 2-year high school / pre-university program based in Honeydew, Johannesburg. And then after 5 years, I moved to Mauritius with the founder, Fred Swaneker, who is, an accomplished entrepreneur himself. And we started the African Leadership University. So I was there as the director of student life for the first couple of years. Then I moved to Rwanda, where I set up the Rwanda branch of the African Leadership University, which is what I did for the last 2 years. I am currently on some sort of sabbatical after spending just under 10 years in education and leadership development with the group, kind of, just re-energizing, recharging my batteries for the next 10 years.
When you say you're on a sabbatical, what does that mean? Like, what are you doing? Is it just living on the beach, sipping on mojitos? What does that look like?
Yeah, occasionally. It's involved a lot of travels. I was mentioning earlier to you before we got on air, I've been traveling. I've been on the road for the last 5 months. I've traveled to about 11 countries during that time, visiting some friends and family and relatives and a lot of my former students, and also just going to, some places that I'm fond of. But I've also been doing some kind of, leadership consulting with a variety of organizations, including the Obama Foundation. And I did some work for Facebook recently. So, all of that has taken me on the road. But I suppose what I mean by a sabbatical is that I'm not fully employed 24/7, which has essentially been the case for the last 9 years. I am taking a break. The way I frame it is I'm taking a break from responsibility and accountability for a little while. That's my short definition of my sabbatical.
No, I actually like that definition. Because I'm sort of obsessed with Rwanda, I'm going to start the conversation there. I think you said you spent about 2 years in Rwanda. Was it in Kigali?
That is correct, yes. Kigali.
Okay. How did you find Rwanda? There's so much that is fascinating about Rwanda, whether it's the history or what's happening there currently. But what was your experience of Kigali and Rwanda as a whole?
I mean, absolutely right. What a fascinating country, fascinating culture and history, and obviously tragic in so many ways, but at the same time, what an inspiring story of hope for the continent and the rest of Africa. You know, I think I've seen a type of Africa that so many of us have dreamt of for so long that is actually happening, you know. And I was telling you just now, I love traveling and I've traveled a lot. I've been to 39 countries in my, fairly young life. And the most, and I mean this with all my heart, right? The cleanest city I've ever been to is hands down Kigali. And, and that's right here in Africa, right? And the stereotypes attached to the continent and all of that. And sometimes, all it takes is good governance, good leadership, and a culture, more importantly, and a culture, right? That people buy into it, that people believe in it, and that people subscribe to it is the only reason why Rwanda is such a, remarkable place where you can see that, we can raise the bar and live to certain standards that is comparable to the rest of the world, right? So that's one. And the second thing I'd say is just, it's such a, obviously it's a young country if you were to think about, where it's come from since 1994, in many ways similar to South Africa, right? When you think about 94 being a very pivotal year, and to see what they have done in 25 years, and to see a nation being built essentially from the ashes is just really, really remarkable. And I, being in education, having been part of an initiative that is, a very integral part of that nation building process of, developing young talent, equipping them with the right skills, both hard and soft skills, to be able to play a part in taking Rwanda to the next level. It's just been extremely, extremely rewarding, eye-opening, and definitely learned a lot of lessons there that I know will carry with me for the rest of my life.
I really like that. I've spoken to a few people who've been through the African Leadership sort of university or the African Leadership Group, but maybe it's worth exploring that just a bit. What is ALU? Can you just talk us through that, and how do I form part of the African Leadership University?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and as I mentioned, ALU, the African Leadership University, is part of this African Leadership Group, this movement that Fred Swaniker started about 12, 13 years ago, right? And it started with this high school that we have here. Essentially, while the university is obviously a university and different from the high school, our mission and our vision is very, very similar, if not exactly the same, right? We are in the business of developing the next generation of African leaders. I think, there is no shying away from the truth, which is that our leadership on the continent has let us down for the last, 50, 60 years since independence, right? And if we are going to move forward as the youngest continent in the world and soon to become the largest workforce in the entire world, by the year 2035, Africa will have, the largest workforce in the world, larger than China, larger than India, right? By the end of this century, almost half of the entire world is going to be African. 40% of the entire world's population is going to be right here on this continent. So I think, we think at the African Leadership Group that we have a moral imperative to prepare ourselves for that future and to prepare this youth that is going to have to be the leaders to take us into that new Africa. They need the support, they need the scaffolding, they need to be taken back to the basics around ethical leadership, around entrepreneurial leadership, around doing things the right way and doing right by the people that we are supposed to serve on this continent. And how do we do that at the African Leadership Group is by first of all just building this, network of leaders, entrepreneurs from all over the continent, right? Our network is pretty extensive. Our students come from all over the continent, right? We have, over 50 of the 54 African countries that are represented in the, student body and the alumni base of the African Leadership Group in general. And our belief is that the continent is going to move forward as a Pan-African force, as a Pan-African movement, right? And by bringing these young people together, whether it's at our academy in Johannesburg, whether it's at our university in Mauritius or in Rwanda, the idea is to, build that crucible where these young people come together, get to know more about each other, learn from the differences and the nuances of each other's cultures, but also, revel in our common identity as Africans and leverage that to really power the continent towards prosperity, right? And I'm a believer that education is critical. It's at the core, it's at the base, and that's how we're doing it, by going straight into education, focusing on, developing mindsets, developing skills, as I mentioned earlier, hard and soft skills that will enable these people to be the change makers that we need and that we deserve on our continent.
Okay. I mean, Veda, there's a question that I want to ask, but to sort of leading to that question, I think it's worth going through your educational background first. Sort of you spoke about the value of education just now. Can you take us through sort of what you have studied so that our listeners at least have that context before
Sure.
we ask the next question?
Yeah, and I think I have a bit of an unconventional journey, though I think that's probably going to become the norm going into the future. I was, as I said, born and raised in Mauritius. So I went to high school in Mauritius. Then I went to study in the US. I studied at Princeton University. I went there to be a mechanical aerospace engineer, which I did for a couple of years. But, liberal arts education in the US allows you to change along that journey of learning, which is essentially what ended up happening to me. I then graduated actually with a degree in political science and political economy. But I'd always had an interest in social entrepreneurship. So I took a lot of classes around social entrepreneurship, which is essentially the path that landed me at the African Leadership Academy, which then kind of took me on a different path in education, but also entrepreneurship education, and then eventually leadership education, So the dots connect, but they did not connect back then when I was making choices about education paths, right? It's just that by following my interest and my passion, I've been able to explore through my education journey the things that I was interested in and eventually build a career in it.
So as I'm looking at your profile. So you went to Princeton University, which by definition means you could have really chosen what you wanted to do after that. The senior thesis that you worked on is the culture of the coup d'etat, understanding why coup d'etats are considered as a legitimate form of change in governments in Niger. I love that. So I don't know what is in the thesis, but I love that that is the choice you made. Why specifically? What at the time was the fascination for you with coup d'etats?
Interestingly, I wrote my senior thesis in 2010, and so my thesis was due somewhere around May, and Niger had a coup d'etat either at the end of 2009 or beginning 2010. And it was the fourth time that they had a coup d'etat since their independence. What was fascinating was right after the coup d'etat, like when the media was covering it, people were actually in the streets and celebrating. And even Democracy Watch in Niger had some very interesting comments about, and I hope I'm quoting them properly here, some comments about how, like, well, this is Niger and it's different, right? So like the standards of what is acceptable in a democracy seem to be different in that place. So I was just very, very fascinated about, wait, what is it? What is it that, like, I know, for instance, so I'm from Mauritius, right? Like, we can vote a government in and we can be extremely, excruciatingly critical of our government. But you know what? Because we voted that government in, we will, bite the dust, we will suck it up for 5 years, and then after 5 years, we'll vote them out of government. But if anybody were to try to say, well, you know what? We can't deal with this government, we're just going to do a coup d'etat and get rid of them, like nobody would stand for that, no matter how much disagreement and hatred we may have for our government. And that's simply because, like it is a coup d'etat would not be considered a legitimate form of, changing government, right? I suppose it's the respect for the constitution and the democratic approach to, changing government. And for me, it was just very, very fascinating how, like it was a legitimate, it almost seemed like it was a legitimate form of government change in Niger. And I had my thesis advisor was, a political scientist, obviously, and she had a deep interest in that as well. And as we were discussing, where I could put my focus, she was very encouraging of exploring that. And my only, I suppose, disappointment is that I didn't get to go to Niger to do my research, but it was still a very fascinating experience to look at just coup d'etats in general and just like explore legitimate or what is deemed to be legitimate forms of government change in different parts of the world.
I really like that. I mean, coup d'etats in Africa and South America specifically seems to be sort of how we go about our politics. That's why it's sort of, when I looked at your profile, that's the one thing that really stood out. But you said you've been to 39 countries, I think is what you said. What have been maybe some of the lessons that you have extracted from those visits? And sort of what are some of the countries that you've been to? And I assume this covers not only Africa, but all the other different continents. But what would you say have been the takeaways from those travels?
Yeah, I remember this very clearly. When I was applying to go to university on my college application, I wrote about how, I love my country, but it is a tiny island and you can literally see the ocean from any point on the island. So literally the world for us ended where the ocean began. And I was like, I know there is a world out there and I want to go out and I want to explore and I want to see and I want to learn. I want to learn about other cultures. And I'm very glad that I've been able to stay true to that, right? My first time ever on a plane was to go to college. And since then, I've been able to travel a lot. But because of that desire to explore the world and see the world and meet people of different cultures, etc. And biggest insight is something that will probably sound extremely, simple, and yet I think is very powerful, is that no matter where you are, which culture you're in, what country you're in, people are the same. We may have different practices, we may eat food differently, we may have different likes and tastes, but there are a few fundamental things that we all care about. We all want peace. We all want to live in peace. We all want love. We all want to be loved. We all want a better future for ourselves and for our children and for future generations, right? So, all the squabbles that we can read about, and I'm, you know this very well, the situation we've seen in South Africa recently, and all the squabbles that we have about, our differences and from where we come from and whatnot. Ultimately, all of us are looking for the same thing, right? Ultimately, all of us want to be able to have a roof on top of our head and to be able to eat and drink and live well and be loved by our people and give love. And that does not change, right? And yeah, I've been to places where I don't speak the language, but there is the universal language of, and I know this is going to sound so cliche, like I'm like quoting from like a cheesy rom-com or something, but fundamentally the universal language of love is something that you can feel anywhere you go, right? Especially if and when you meet people who respect and love you and appreciate you for just the common humanity that we share, right? And for me, that's been like the biggest eye opener. It's like, even in Mauritius, on that tiny island, we have our own squabbles around identity, around ethnic identity, around who deserves what based on their skin color and their gender and their, ancestry and whatnot. And at the end of the day, right, none of that stuff matters, because especially today in this world when we are dealing with far bigger challenges that literally threaten our very existence, right? For me, it's just like, why are we wasting time on those little things when there's so much more and so many bigger things that are at stake that warrants our attention and time?
I mean, the issue of ethnicity, or in Africa specifically, tribalism, it's something that it's such an exhausting thing to have to deal with, but it remains a reality in many parts of our continent. Yesterday, someone, one of our guests, Wesley Mark, shared a video of the cosmos where you sort of zoom in and out of the cosmos. So you zoom into where Earth is located, then you zoom out and see this whole thing, the galaxy, universe, cosmos. And I shared that with my 13-year-old son, and the comment he made was, gee, thank you for sharing this, because now I see just how small and insignificant I am.
Absolutely.
And yet, something like ethnicity or tribalism, it's such a localized thing where if my neighbor looks different or they sound different, I then find reason to fight with that person. But when you zoom out, all you see is an African continent where, yes, there are differences, but essentially we are one people. At least that's my view. And obviously, as the host of 1000 African Voices, that would be my view. So I suppose I'm not really asking a question. Is this something that bugs me so much that we cannot see beyond our perceived differences so that we can move forward as one Africa? But yeah, Veda, that's really just something that bugs me a lot. You've talked about Rwanda, Johannesburg, the States having come from Mauritius. Even though we think of Mauritius as sort of an island, I am aware that it's really a series of different islands that come together to form Mauritius. There's a reason, I suppose, that you've traveled to all the areas that you have been to. Now you say you're on a sabbatical, but what is the driver? Why can you not stay put in one place?
I suppose for the reason that I just shared with you just now, right, is that I realize I'm part of a much bigger family, right, and that's a family that has been integral to my most formative years as a person, in the way it has helped me frame my own identity as a citizen of the world, as an African, as a Pan-Africanist. So to your point about tribes, I suppose my tribe is global, and everybody wants to be with their tribe, and that's where I find my joy and my sense of purpose and sense of worth, and I am very, very, very grateful that I am privileged enough to be able to afford to, be in different places. So yeah, I don't want to take that for granted, and I just feel like I'm gonna make the most of it for as long as I can, until the day comes when I'm like, okay, right, I'm done. Take my passport. I'm just sitting and sipping mojito on the beach now for eternity.
Veda, I mean, you mentioned the passport, and I understand. So I like traveling Africa, but the one thing that frustrates me is the need to travel with a passport and at times a visa. I know that there are special diplomats who can qualify for an African Union visa, but I still cannot understand the idea of me needing a passport to move from, say, Kenya to Tanzania. I know in East Africa it's a bit easier than across the rest of the continent. Do you have a view on how Africa is structured in terms of travel? To move from Rwanda to South Africa, for instance, you do need documentation. So I don't know if you have a view on that.
Yes, I mean, look, what I've really liked is that I've seen the evolution over the last 10 years from it being extremely difficult to travel across Africa to, it becoming a lot easier. So, a lot of countries in the AU have relaxed their visa, regulations. So it's a lot easier now to travel across the continent. Many countries, including Mauritius, including Rwanda, including Ghana, Senegal, Kenya, Uganda. A lot of countries have recently, relaxed their visa restrictions, and you can, as an African, you can go there either with visa on arrival or without a visa, right? So I have been very lucky that I have a Mauritian passport, which is a fairly easy passport to travel with, whether it's in Africa or in Europe or anywhere else. But it's been great to see that it's become a lot easier. That said, it is still not that easy in South Africa, as you rightly mentioned. It's quite hard still for Rwandans and some other nationalities to be able to travel here. But then again, visa and all, it's complicated, right? It's not just a question of border crossing. For some of us, again, usually the privileged few who travel for leisure, and we kind of want it to be easy, but a lot of people who cross borders are crossing borders in pursuit of better opportunities, and that has complications for any government, any country, right?
Yeah.
So I also understand the nuances and the challenges of visa restrictions.
No, I appreciate that. There's a book that I'm reading currently, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century.
Fascinating. I'm reading the same book.
Oh.
Well, I bought both that and Homo Deus by Yuval, the same author, because I read Homo Sapiens first, and I was like, "Whoa, this guy is onto something," and I need to see what he has to say.
Oh, I need to move to Homo Deus. I have read Sapiens. So I suppose now we are on the same book. I don't know how far you are, so don't tell me what happens after page 200, please.
I won't tell you anything, yeah.
It's such a fascinating book because Yuval addresses the issue of immigration, especially in Europe. It's not only a topical issue, but it's a very sensitive issue where the fighting in the Middle East has led to this influx of immigrants across Europe. And I like how he addresses that issue. So in Africa, you would think that the complexity of traveling across Africa for me shouldn't be as high as it would be for someone to move from Syria to Germany, for instance. But I like the arguments that Yuval makes in the book. So, I mean, I'm still stuck on the idea of saying I'm reading this book and my guest says, "Oh yeah, me too, same." There's something cool about that. But the whole idea of immigration, it is, when you hear it on the news, it sounds very straightforward, but when you go into the details, you'll understand why it is really such a complex issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering what you're going to be doing after the sabbatical. I don't know what your time frame is like, but you must be thinking about what to do next. What does someone who's labeled as one of Africa's leading entrepreneurs and a change maker do after a sabbatical?
Yeah, an unfortunate label. It puts the pressure on you, doesn't it? But I think I have a fair sense of what I want to do. Like I said, I've spent a good 10 years that honestly feels like a lifetime in education, just because, we've done such really interesting work in the last decade with the African Leadership Group. But I do think that I will probably take a bit of a break from that. Well, I will, I strongly believe that once an educator, always an educator. I'll always be involved in education. I'll continue doing a lot of the, leadership development work that I've been doing. But I would be very keen to pursue some of my other interests as well. I have a very deep interest in the arts. I used to be an actor before. I've also directed a number of plays as well, and it is just something that I'm keen to figure out, if there's something entrepreneurial to do in there. So I'm still kind of thinking and toying with some ideas, but yeah, just really curious to see where that takes me by the end of the sabbatical.
So when we started the conversation, I introduced you as one of the 2019's Africa's most influential young people. And maybe some of our listeners at that point thought, I wonder why he's on that list. So after a conversation about the impact that you've had on the countries that you've been at, and the fact that you studied in the States and you came back and you made a real difference in Africa, and as if that was not enough, you now just nonchalantly say, yes, I've also been an actor and I've directed a few things. So at this moment, then our listeners will go, okay, now we understand. How does someone move from acting to education to entrepreneurship? I don't know. It kind of forces me to ask you about your personal life. The countries that you've been to. Yeah, we have to talk about how you've set that up. How are you able to do all of that? And how does it impact your family life? And as I'm saying that, I'm sort of doing the quotation marks gesture. What's the impact of that on your family life?
So, I mean, I'm thankfully still single. Well, I am with someone. Let me not say I'm single. I'll get in trouble. But I'm not married. I don't have children. So, I don't have like family in that sense that, is dependent and reliant on me. As for my parents are in Mauritius and, touch wood, they're in good health and they're pretty self-reliant and I don't feel the need to be, physically present all the time in Mauritius just yet. But, look, I think, yeah, I'm probably amongst a small group of people who live a life like that. But, there still is, I think, a sizable number of people out there who pretty much live in the diaspora. And I think, you're going to have, especially in that mobility is now, as we were discussing right now with visa and all of that stuff, but just like mobility in general is a lot easier, right? A lot more affordable and all of that. I think we are looking at a world where more people will probably live the type of, life that you are hearing me describe here, right? Where, we're not going to be bound by, because I think even our understanding of some identities like our national identity and our patriotism, etc., I think is going to continue evolving, and that I think will influence people to not restrict themselves to physical borders, right? But I do also want to acknowledge that I realize I come from a place of privilege, so this may not be the reality for everyone, and it's just knowing that I have that privilege and I want to make the most of it, and hopefully do good with it.
No, totally agree. I mean, the whole issue of borders, so again, Kenya to Tanzania, for me, it remains such an artificial thing that at some point, I mean, when you look at Africa, somewhere in 1896, someone said, I'm going to draw my line here and I'll call this Rhodesia and I'll call this part Brazzaville or something like that. It's such an artificial thing that, I mean, yes, you're born in Congo, for instance, and then you confine yourself to those lines. The lines could have been so different, which means your life would have been really, really different. And that's why on 1000 African Voices, we're really focusing more on how we can create a borderless Africa. And I know for now it sort of sounds like a very abstract thing, but I do live to see the day when we will be in a borderless Africa with free travel and cultures that just mingle, and eventually we become, as we should be, one people. But at the same time, there is beauty in having cultural diversity. I appreciate that. It really does make life interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And borders doesn't mean that it has to erode cultural identity, right? I think we can all live with diversity within. I mean, I look at my country. Could you have imagined of a more interesting social experiment, right? We live on an island where there were no human beings who ever lived there. And then when you look at the history of the country, people were brought in from all over. Europeans came, settled, brought slaves from the continent to the island. And after slavery was abolished, brought indentured labor from India and China. And today you have a culture that is such an interesting melting pot, and we're living in peace and harmony, and are actually a very interesting example of, what democracy and freedom and liberty could look like on our continent. So, yeah, I mean, for me, borders should not limit us from appreciating our ancestral heritage and cultures. If anything, it's probably what's limiting us from sharing what we have with people who are interestingly across the border, I lived in Rwanda. You go to Gisenyi, which is the city that's right at the border between Rwanda and DRC, and Goma. And, there's Lake Kivu there. And I mean, it should have been one thing, because culturally, these people are exactly the same, right? We talked about Niger earlier. You look at Niger, Niamey, where it is at the very top, right across the border with Nigeria. It is such an artificial boundary that was drawn, right? But it's the same people, right? Same people, same culture, same language. So, yeah, we need to wake up from the nonsense that we have inherited through colonialism and start thinking a bit for ourselves.
Yeah. I like how your passion kind of got recorded up a bit when you spoke about the similarities in cultures that are now having to be treated as separate because there's a border in between. I was at Lake Kivu in September, if not August. And as I sat there, I looked across and the locals were saying, yes, if you take a boat, 20 minutes from now, you'll be in DR Congo. Like, really, that's all it takes, 20 minutes. And the two countries are supposedly different. But anyway, one day maybe we'll sort that out.
Hopefully.
I don't know, as we maybe about to wrap up, are there maybe things you want to address that we haven't touched on?
Address? I don't know, man. There are so many issues in this world we need to address. So I don't know if we have the time to address all of it. But no, I just appreciate getting the opportunity to share a bit of my journey and my story. So thank you for that.
No, thank you. I mean, they are part of the job, I suppose. I speak to, you'll probably be our 85th voice that we've covered in the last 2 years. We do one voice a week. So from time to time, my job is the easiest. I ask the questions, I sit back and I listen. But there are certain guests that make you, so at some point you start believing that you are smart as the host. It's only after the conversation has ended that you realize that no, it's actually not the case. You find yourself in a smart conversation because the guest pulled you to his level. So this conversation for me has been that I've really appreciated being pulled up to have a different level of conversation. So that's sort of what I will take away from this. And for that, I have you to thank. So
that's very kind. Thank you.
Veda Sunassee, I've thoroughly enjoyed a very laid-back conversation on many different things, from immigration to culture to travel to education. This has really been a blast, and for that, I thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. I really enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much.
1000 African Voices.
You've been listening to 1000 African Voices. Please join us next time as we bring you yet another African voice. 1000 African Voices is produced by Aburengwi C. Sam Ganich is our sound engineer, with our head researcher Jones Maleka. The intro soundtrack for the show is by the legendary Salif Gator from his 1995 album Forlorn. The song you're listening to right now is by Chronix, and the title of the song is Legend. For more information, including the contact details of our guests, please visit us on our website www.1000africanvoices.com. You can also subscribe to our show on iTunes by searching for 1000 African Voices. We are also available on Stitcher. You can find us as well on Podbean. The only thing we ask of you is that you subscribe to our show by logging on to 1000africanvoices.com and click the subscribe button. That helps us grow. It helps us keep producing and bringing to you more African voices. Until next time, Kungana Africa, and take care.
Being an ordinary person doing what's right. Yesterday at the football game, a little girl asked me my name. She said, "Sir, I've seen you before, tell me, who are you?" I said, "I am a legend that you never heard of before." She said, "I am a lion, but you never heard me roar. I am a hero that nobody celebrates, but if one person remembers my name, that means on the ocean of fame I'm an unknown sailor. I'm the percussionist playing with the whalers, the one with the shaker, the mover and shaker. My name wasn't on the front of the paper, but me not cater. Much more than the worker, the work is greater. Creation glorifies creator. So all deeds done are in the name of my maker. I am a legend that you probably never hear about. Words from the lion's mouth. I am a hero that nobody celebrates, but if one person remembers my name, give praise, that means I made a change. Story of my life, ordinary person just like you. If you take a look inside, you see the great things that people do. We're out here changing lives day and night, day in, day out. BBC don't show it, CNN don't show it. He's out.